Hello and welcome to the Beginning of Wisdom Live. I'm Andrew Schumacher. Hope y'all are having a wonderful evening. I am glad to be here. I just thought it would be a great day to talk about something I have been working on lately. So I have for a very long time, if you've watched here, you know I've listened to the guys at Messiah Matters, Caleb and Rob, and they, I've interviewed Caleb, he's interviewed me. We've had some, good stuff, good back and forth in the past, and things are great. But they had a video a little bit ago talking about the Hebrew term olam and forever, and does it mean forever, and all that. They had a question come in on their on that topic, and so that's what they covered in one of their episodes. So that is first of all something that I applaud them for even taking up the topic. It is one of those topics that you just don't hear anybody in the Torah movements talking about. They really like to quote the verses, and that say this is an eternal ordinance, or this is a commandment forever. In depending on your translation, some of them do say it that way, and so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of citation of those verses, but very, very little actual going into detail, looking at the Hebrew, looking at the context, looking at how things are said. That doesn't happen very much. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. I want to double check, make sure everything, it looks like it's going good here in the stream. So I do plan on, during this stream, pausing at times and checking with the chat. So if you have questions or things like that, feel free to put those in there, or comments, or snide remarks, whatever you want. So anyway, I'm very excited to get into this topic. So what we're going to do, we're going to listen to some clips from the episode in question, and we're going to go ahead and be responding to those clips as sort of the main meat of the episode, where they're talking about this issue. So I do want to give you a little bit of a background. So I have some videos on my channel about this topic, but like I said, it's very common for them to talk about, this is a commandment forever, because it seems to say that in the English, but you don't hear them talk about the Hebrew. And whereas on a lot of other topics, you often hear them bring up, this is the Hebrew word such and such, and it means this. And of course, this is very relevant to the question of Torah observance, or if we're supposed to keep, observing these commandments. Certainly, they ought, this kind of language would be very relevant to that. But when you look into the lexical sources, you do tend to see that they're not, that it doesn't always have to mean forever, and it's not even really the primary meaning of the term that's being used there. But in some contexts, it definitely does mean forever, but not in others. So there's a question of, does this mean what they're saying here in this text? So that's the issue. They're trying to answer that issue in their show, and that's what we're going to be responding to. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the first clip from the show, just kind of as things are set up. when they're talking about the question. One thing I left out of it, just for time's sake, is Caleb mentions, okay, so this is the question we got in the email. He does mention that basically he got like a 5-page email or something like that. It was a very long email, so he didn't read the whole email. But and that tells me this person has definitely been thinking about this issue. They have interacted with different, they've either watched videos or read things, multiple sources potentially. Who knows? But they've got a lot of thoughts to write a long email. But he just boils it down to the main question, and that's what we'll be looking at here. So let me go ahead and pull that up.
This is a email.
Oh, sorry. I don't think we're ready for that yet. Let me make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay, here we go. And let me know if you can hear this, if something doesn't come through.
This is a email that we got. We got one this past week from someone, but it's a view that has been presented to us by multiple people. And I think the reason why is because it's becoming a mainstream argument for people in the mainstream Christian belief that the Torah has been done away with. And I have written out essentially what the question is in my own words, to try to shorten it, because the email that we got was like, I don't know, 6 pages or something like that. So here is my rewording of the question. The general question goes, I have people telling me that there are places in the Bible that say forever that are clearly not forever, like the laws pertaining to the tabernacle. How can we say the laws of Torah are forever if forever doesn't always mean forever? And I have gotten
forever, 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 forever.
Rob didn't know what that was from. I couldn't believe that. Anyway, okay.
Yeah.
Not the point. So the question is obvious. What do we do with the passages that seem to say that things are forever? Now, let's give an example of where we as Torah pursuant believers would use the term forever. It is a sign between me and my people, talking about the Sabbath, between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So it is a sign forever, right?
Okay. So there's your setup, basically, and he so the question is, yeah, sometimes in the context, it doesn't always have to mean forever. So what's going on here? And he goes to the text there in Exodus 31, and we'll go to that. But I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything. So, and he says that he's heard this a lot. This sort of becoming a mainstream argument that the Torah has been done away with. So I want to address a couple of things here before we really get into the meat. One thing that I've noticed about, well, let me generalize this a lot. This is just something I like to do. I hope you enjoy it. But I think there's a lot of stuff in here that is it's a good learning opportunity for all of us to understand the thinking around apologetics and weighing different viewpoints and things like that, and what exactly, sometimes it can be tough to not get lost in the weeds when it comes to these things. So let me start with something that, to put it in a nutshell, when it comes to argumentation, what exactly is at stake here with this concept of these commandments being forever? Some of the commandments are, they have this term, this Hebrew term olam attached to them, or le'olam, as you'll hear Rob say in another clip. And the term, if it has the little, well, I'll get to that when I get to it. But here's the thing. What's really at stake here? What's the argument? So the argument is, from the Torah observant side, the argument is, look, these texts say these commandments are forever, and therefore there's no way they could change or be, or no longer be obligatory, things like that. And I'm careful with my language here because, and you'll see why. That's their argument. So it's an argument from the text. They're looking at the text and they're saying the text supports it. It teaches our view on the Torah. You should accept it. What's the mainstream Christian argument? The mainstream Christian argument about this issue is to say this Hebrew term doesn't always mean eternal or forever. There are contexts, and we'll go over those in this video, where it doesn't have to mean that. Therefore, the Christian argument, it's a counter argument. It's saying, look, it means something a little bit different than that, and so you can't establish your doctrine based on it. That's the Christian argument. So the Christian argument, or the mainstream Christian argument, you can call it, is sort of, it's a counter argument to the Torah observance argument. If the Torah observance argument is right, Torah observance is true. But if the mainstream Christian argument is right, then that just makes this not a good argument. It doesn't mean Torah observance isn't true. It just means this is a bad argument. And we'll kind of get into some of that a little bit, but I want to kind of wrestle with that a little bit, because here's the thing. Whenever you have, there are lots of arguments out there, and some arguments are designed to establish your point, establish your conclusion. That's what this argument about this text is meant to do for the Torah observance position. It's meant to establish that doctrine as true. Other arguments are not meant to establish your position, but rather to take the legs out from under another argument and show that another argument's not a good argument for that other position. So what it's meant to do is show that, well, hey, that's actually a bad argument for whatever the conclusion is. So the thing is, there are good arguments and there are bad arguments. But here's the thing. You can make a bad argument for anything. You can make a bad argument for a true position. You can have a conclusion that is true. It is right, and you can still come up with bad arguments to support it. You can also come up with good arguments to support it. But here's what you can't do. You can't come up with any good arguments to support false conclusions. It doesn't work. So what we're looking at here is a situation where the Torah observance position is saying, look, this says forever, that's our argument, and that establishes our position. And the mainstream Christian position is saying, that's not a good argument. My position in this whole video is not really going to be anything to do with whether or not Torah observance is true. Not in itself, because we're going to be focused in on this particular issue. But it's important to think these things through so you don't get confused. I can't tell you how many times I address a bad argument from a Torah observer and I get comments in the videos about how, what I said didn't prove that, that it's wrong to keep the law or something along those lines. It's like, well, that wasn't the point. I wasn't trying to prove that. Now I have other arguments that do prove that, but I wasn't making it in that place. So it's something to think about as we're digging into this stuff. So let's dive into this text. This text is the one. This is Exodus 31, and let me go ahead and pull up the browser here, and I've got it already on screen. So let me grab that so I can see it a little better. All right, so let's read the passage here in context. So it says, "But as for you, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, you shall surely keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh who makes you holy. Therefore, you shall keep the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days' work may be done, But on the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to Yahweh. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. So the sons of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to celebrate the Sabbath throughout the generations as an everlasting covenant. There's our word Olam. It is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. That's the word le'olam. It just has the little preposition there on the front. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, but on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. So here's our one of our texts, right? It says everlasting covenant, says a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. So let's take a look at what exactly is going on here. Does this mean, hey, the Sabbath needs to be kept forever and ever and ever, never to end, and nothing could ever come along to make any change to how that works? Well, let's take a look at the Hebrew now. I've been saying the word, but let's actually pull up the word. So what I'm going to do is take this text, verse 16 there, where it says everlasting covenant. And I'm going to jump over to Bible Hub, and I'm just going to do this live with you so you can kind of see how it works when I'm doing this. It's not good to talk and type at the same time. All right, 31:16. All right. So Exodus 31:16, let's grab the Hebrew, and here we are. So therefore shall keep. All right. So down at the end, here's the word. It's perpetual on this, but this is where it said everlasting covenant. And there you see it, Olam, right? That's our term. And if we go to the very next verse, 17, between me and the sons of Israel forever, and you see there le'olam. So those are the terms that we're looking at. And what does this mean? So let's go ahead and just take a look at the page for this word. So we've got several different sources here, but you see Strong's Concordance gives it a term, long duration, antiquity, or futurity. NAS Concordance definition, same thing, long duration, antiquity, futurity. Why do they agree so much? Well, Brown Driver Briggs, which is the more in-depth lexicon, not just a concordance, it says noun, masculine, long duration, antiquity, futurity. So that's what we have in terms of the lexical meaning. That's what this word means. It means long duration. And it can be, you see, antiquity. It can be in the past. It can also be into the future. So they all, and you'll notice, none of them give the primary meaning as eternal or forever. That's not the main, basic definition of the term. It can mean that, and we'll see that as we go on. It can mean that if the context demands it. This term definitely can be applied in such a way that it does mean eternal or forever, never ending. But as we saw there, the definition is not fixed to just that. And let's see, I'm gonna come back to that, but I want to jump over to I want to show some examples where it doesn't mean that in the text, where it definitely doesn't mean forever. So first one is going to be Numbers 10, 6 through 8. So I'm just going to do Numbers 10, and we will get down there. So here's verse 6. So it says, "Then you will blow an alarm the second time, and the camps that are pitched on the south side shall set out. An alarm is to be blown for them to set out. When convening the assembly, however, you shall blow without sounding an alarm. The priestly sons of Aaron, moreover, shall blow the trumpets, and this shall be for you a perpetual statute throughout your generations." So this is the phrase. This is the exact kind of language we were seeing there in Exodus 31. a perpetual statute throughout your generations. It could say an eternal, everlasting. That those are terms that get used a lot for this term. This is olam. This is just the straight adjective form of the word. It's describing this statute as being perpetual. But what is this statute? This is a statute that the sons of Aaron, the priests, the Levites, when it's time to move the camp, they're to blow their trumpets, and the southern camp shall move first, and all this stuff. This is regulations for moving the camp while they're in the wilderness. But what happens in Deuteronomy? In Deuteronomy, they end up in the land. And when they're in the land and they go in and they drive out people and they occupy the cities, they're not going to be moving the whole camp ever again. So this term, this statute, while it is perpetual, it's long lasting, it has a lasting duration, it lasts a long time, lasts 40 years while they're wandering in the desert. It doesn't, when the situation on the ground changes, the statute is no longer applicable to their situation anymore. So they don't do it. They don't blow the trumpet. They don't, and they wouldn't have an opportunity to. I mean, what spurred them on to blow the trumpet and start moving the camp? Well, it says, when the pillar of cloud or fire moved from the tent and moved out in front of the camps, that was a signal like, hey, we need to move the camps. So they blow the trumpets and they get started and start moving the camp. But that's something that was meant to last for a period of time, and then it came to an end. So how does that, but it uses this term. It says it's a perpetual statute throughout your generations, right? Well, if throughout your generations means for ever and ever and ever, for every generation going into the future, that it doesn't seem to be true that this is going to last. It's one generation, actually, that's going to be wandering in the wilderness, and that's it. And then they're going to be, going into the land, and this will not happen anymore. As we look, there's another example. This is in Deuteronomy, though it's not the only example of this particular command, but I'll go ahead and bring it up. So Deuteronomy 15. This has to do with a number of things. It has to do with Jubilee and forgiving debts and things like that. But as we go down here, I believe it was verse 16 is where we'll start. It says, and it will be that if he says to you, so this is about a slave. So if you have a slave and it's coming up on the time basically for him to be freed, because they don't keep slaves for life just as a matter of course. They're all freed in the Jubilee. And I think, well, there's a number of laws around that. But it says there in verse 16, it will be that if he says to you, I will not go out from you, because he loves you and your household, since he fares well with you, then you shall take an awl and pierce it through his ear into the door, and he shall be your servant forever. Le'olam. Also you shall do likewise to your maidservant. So again, this person becomes a slave, but does that mean they are a slave forever and ever and ever, like for all generations? Like, that doesn't make any sense. They will die someday, and certainly in the resurrection and in the life to come, they're not going to be a slave of this person that they happen to be, way back during their life on earth and before. Jesus sets all the captives free, right? They're not going to stay slaves forever and ever. It is a lifelong, and that's what this is meaning. It's olam. It's lasting a long time, and that's where it is. Also, so something also that is important to look at with this term is that whenever it's about the past, it's really never eternal. It's always a finite term. It's always about creation and how the world is. And so you have examples Deuteronomy, I won't pull it all up, but Deuteronomy 32:7 says, "Remember the ancient days," and that's the term olam. So there's just some basic background on what the term means and the different ways that we see it used, and so that's to give you kind of a background based on the question. So why is the question being raised about this argument from the Torah observance folks? Why is it a question about whether these are good verses to use to establish Torah observance? And this is why, because the term does not always mean, that it lasts forever and ever. So let's go to the next.
This is a email that we got. We got one this past week.
Go to the next clip. So this is the next
Yeah,
clip.
yeah, I think so. I think, well, le'olam is the word we're talking about. Le'olam.
Right.
I don't know if maybe you already said that. So le'olam, does it mean forever or not? And then you mentioned a passage concerning the priests or Jonah, but also in Exodus, it's Exodus 20, what is it? Exodus 21:6, where when there's a slave who's to go free after 6 years, if he says, "Oh, I love my master and I want to stay," etc., he gets his ear pierced, and it says he will be his slave forever.
Right.
And this is a classic location where Martin Luther pointed this out and says this can't mean forever.
Yeah, it says that once again, this Vanity Fair, and this wasn't the only place. I looked at probably 5 or 6 articles. They all bring up that one place.
Yeah.
Well,
but what it means is it means fixed and
for the rest of his
irrevocable.
life.
And so in the case of the slave, that's the slave le'olam, it means when the Jubilee comes, there is a legal precedent that this is exemption, because this is a fixed. It's not relating to how long. It's understood that the slave's going to die at some point, but the point is that this is a irreversible trajectory.
Right.
This is fixed, and so, but it has some semantic range. The very first occurrence. Does anybody know the very first occurrence of le'olam in the Bible is at the expulsion from the garden, lest they eat and live forever.
Right.
So you could say, oh, well, what does live forever there mean? Well, clearly it means the opposite of what happened as the consequences of Adam and Eve eating, which is they're going to die. So you see le'olam, and it's translated into Greek, eis ton ionon, I think it is. It's used in Hebrews to say you are a priest forever, right? It says you are, your dwelling place is le'olam, is forever. Like forever is just one way that we capture in English the Hebrew idiom.
I had another.
The Hebrew idiom has to do with fixed, like this is a fixed deal. It's not going to change in the future.
Look, let's talk about this. There's a couple of things.
It's like the Sabbath command is a covenant le'olam between me and Israel.
Right.
They'll say, "Oh, it doesn't mean le'olam. It doesn't mean forever. There, it only means for a dispensation." That's a
okay. Let's talk about that.
That's a clever tool. That's a clever interpretive tool for someone who's weaseling out of.
I agree. I agree with you, but
okay, I'm gonna jump in here. My clips are not where I was expecting them to be. I have some longer ones because there's some good stuff, but I wanna, and I'm gonna find another one where Caleb's talking, and I see Messiah Matters in the chat. It's good to see you guys. I don't know. I'm guessing that's Caleb, but and so I don't know. I wasn't looking at the chat earlier, so I don't know everything that you're responding to. But what I would, but let's talk about this particular clip. So there's a lot of stuff that was in here, that especially I want to talk about what Rob said there about it being fixed or irrevocable. And this is there's two basic answers we're going to see when it comes to the two guys on the show. This is sort of Rob's main answer, is that the term means fixed or irrevocable. Well, I looked, I couldn't find any sources for that. Now Rob knows the languages. He knows Hebrew, and at least I know he knows way more about Hebrew than I do. But here's the thing. I can't find any source that lexically that says the word means fixed. I can't find that. I can find where it means long lasting, and I can see where it gets translated as forever. You notice he even said it's not so much about time, but really every single occurrence that we find in the text is about time. It's about ancient time, it's about future time, it's always about time. And there's a reason for that. I want to pull up for you again.
Yeah, I think so. I think, le'olam is the word we're talking about. Le'olam.
Wrong.
Right.
There we go. Wrong spot. Okay. So let's go back in here to what we were looking at before. So we just briefly touched on the definition of the word as the people who put together the lexicon say it means long duration. That's the actual root meaning of the word. Can it mean forever? Absolutely, it can. If the context calls for it, absolutely. But that's not the root meaning. What we see if we go down here within the Brown Driver Briggs, we can actually find where it is in terms of the root that it's coming from, and you see it's giving us lots of examples of it in the different uses. But let's see, it's down here. No, come on, where'd you go? I missed it. I've seen it, so I know it's in here. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I know it's in here. I just forget where I saw it, but that the term, its root meaning, the root meaning of the word, Hebrew's built on these small, on what's called roots, and they're usually little 3-word. Here we go. It's under the Strong's exhaustive stuff. So it says, ancient time, any more, continuance, eternal. So that's definitely within the realm of possibility. It says, or lo'olam, that's the little L on the front, what Rob was saying, le'olam. It says from alam, properly concealed. So, i.e. the vanishing point, generally time out of mind, past or future, practically eternity. So it can, like I said, can do that. But this is the root. So the root term is alam, which means concealed. And that's really the idea that it's drawing from, is that this is something that's out there where you can't see it. You can't see the end of it. You can't see if it's in the past, you can't see the beginning of it. It's a long time ago. It's in the future. You can't see the end of it. It's a long time from now. That's the idea behind the word. And certainly at times when it's talking about God and his attributes, absolutely. It definitely must mean. And, it must mean that, when it says your love endures forever, from the context, we can tell that is exactly what's going on. That definitely means forever. It isn't just a long time. It is about it being forever. So hey, you too, Caleb, if that's you, have a blessed night. I do hope you check out the rest of this show, because I'm gonna be going into more details. But here's the thing. Again, what Rob said was it means fixed, and he pointed out that in the context of the slave, that would be a proper description of what's going on, right? It would be a proper description to say that when that procedure, when he goes through that process and becomes a slave, a permanent slave, that it's now a fixed reality. It's something that doesn't change because the jubilee happens or anything like that. It's a fixed truth now for that person. Yes, that's true in the situation. That's an accurate way of describing the situation. That doesn't mean that that's what the word olam means. Olam, in every context, in every verse, you can go through, every time it appears in the Bible, it's always about time. And it often isn't about something being fixed, I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes you could look at it and you could say, well, could you insert that idea in here of fixed or irrevocable? Yeah, you could do that here. But that doesn't mean that that's what the word means. It means that there's an overlapping of, of proper descriptors of a situation. One descriptor saying it lasts a long time and the other descriptor saying that it can't be changed, or that it, and sometimes those things go together. But that doesn't make that what the word means. And I would be really interested to hear Rob give us something. And does he have a source that we're not aware of? That is there a lexicon that tells us that that actually olam does mean irrevocable in some contexts? Because that would be very interesting. But as it is, I mean, it's really just it's what he would like it to mean. It's what he sees it meaning in the context of the slave. That doesn't really work in the context of the trumpets. This is an irrevocable thing that, even when Jubilee comes around, it's just a thing that goes on and for 40 years, and then they stop wandering the desert, so they don't do it anymore. They don't blow those trumpets anymore. All right, so I'm gonna pause here for a bit and see if we got any questions or thoughts in the chat here. Dustin Neely, I see you here. Good to see you, buddy. And let's see. One thing. So this is something I think Caleb said, and I don't think he's still here, but I'll address it here in the chat. He says, every major Christian I've ever read says the Torah is a reflection of God's holiness. For his law to change is for his holiness to change. Andrew's advocating for that currently. Well, no, I'm not, because it's assuming it's a circular argument. If you're saying that if it has to be the case that every command in the Torah has to be forever, or else God's character changed. Well, that's your conclusion. I understand that, but that's not. That doesn't mean that that's true. It's not true that every commandment in the Torah is reflective of God's holiness in the same way. There are lots of commandments in the Torah that are eternal, based on the nature of God and the nature of man as being made in his image, and those don't change. They are absolutely reflective, and they're in the law, and they're part of the law, and we speak of the law in that way all the time, and that's not an issue. And even the ones that I would say are tied specifically to the Sinai covenant and don't, last in perpetuity, even those laws, they can reflect something and teach us something about God's holiness without having to remain obligatory in exactly the same way forever in order for that to be the case. It just doesn't, the argument doesn't, it's not a valid argument. I guess you could have both. You can have laws that teach us about God's holiness that aren't necessarily in perpetuity, because they're, again, tied to a particular covenant. But that's not really, what I'm getting at. I mean, it's one or the other. I mean, you can have other arguments, and that's the point I made at the beginning. You can have arguments other besides this one for why you want to be Torah observant. You can say, "Oh yeah, it's because of X, Y, and Z, and these are my other arguments." That's another argument to say that it's based on God's holiness, and God's holiness doesn't change. Well, I agree, God's holiness doesn't change, but that argument is a separate argument from this one. And so if, what all I'm pointing out is that linguistically and contextually, there are many times within the Torah specifically that, and within the context of commands, that forever just doesn't mean, or that olam just doesn't mean forever and ever. All right. I'm going to, so there was a couple things we heard. That was a longer clip, but I want to see if, bear with me a moment. I'm going to see if one of my clips was in the wrong place. So bear with me. You're probably going to hear a wrong clip first, but I'll get to the right one. All right. Okay, let's go to this one here and see if this is what we want. And alrighty, let's see. That didn't do what oh, here we go.
I think where this argument is going to make the most sense is in the world to come. In other words, are all of the laws of Torah fixed throughout eternity? Well, I would say, yeah. I would say yes. But some people are going to say, well, if you look at like the laws of the tabernacle, they have all these laws about carrying this and carrying that and whatnot. And, that the priests are supposed to do this. And there are places where it says they're supposed to minister in front of the curtain in the tabernacle forever. Well, I would agree that there is a time when that gets supplanted over to the temple. They're still supposed to minister forever in front of the curtain, right? Now, could it mean that when Christ comes back and we come into eternity with him, that things change? Yeah, I suppose that they could change. And people are going to say, aha, see, so forever doesn't mean forever because it's going to change. I'm sorry, but I just don't see in the Torah places where people are pointing to forever, that you don't have either poetry that is, setting up some kind of a imagery, or the idea that something, just like Rob said, that something is fixed for this entire time, right? The temporal time that we have on earth, it's fixed for that time. Another one that people point to is 1 Kings 8:13 and 9:3. I have indeed built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your plea, which you have made before me. I have consecrated this house that you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time. And people will point it and say, well, that temple's
remind
not
me
there.
that verse, Caleb.
It's actually in two different chapters. It's in 1 Kings 8:13 and then 1 Kings 9:3. So they
8:13 and 9:3.
Yeah. And the point here is simply that I still believe that God's eyes and ears have been set in that place. It's imagery to say that this is the place that the temple will be. And I believe that it'll be there again.
Okay. So here's, Caleb's talking about talking about the temple and this command where it says, I'm going to have this temple going and it's going to be going forever, right? It's going to be going Olam. And see, there's no temple, so that wasn't forever, right? So that's the argument he's addressing. And his answer to that argument is in his eschatological view that basically it's all about, that Jesus is going to come back. There's going to be a future millennium and a future temple, and it's going to all be set up again. And that's how it's going to really be forever. Well, I've talked about and will continue to talk about how risky it is truly to base your theological positions on other issues that have much more solid foundation on your eschatological views. I think that's risky, very risky, because it's about the future. And the thing about the future is that when we look to the text, we can see we have a track record of the past and past fulfilled prophecies. And a lot of times those prophecies do not get fulfilled the way we think they will, and the way that people thought they would. So, primary example, of course, is pretty much everybody in Jesus' day thought what the Messiah would do was, overthrow Rome and set up his kingdom on earth. That when that didn't happen the way that people thought it would happen, that was a big shock to a lot of folks. It's a very, very dicey way to try to argue. But at least I'll give it this. At least it's a way of trying to consistently make forever be forever. But you'll notice that I've never cited First Kings or any of these texts about other issues. He mentioned poetry. I never cited poetic texts that have forever. I've always cited the ones that are actually about the Torah. And this is something, again, this is one of those learning moments. If you're an apologist and you're saying, I'm confident in my position, I can argue for it, and I know why it's true, then when you are dealing with someone with an opposing view, you should be able to deal with the best that opposing view has to offer. But that's not what Caleb's doing here. He's addressing something that he has a really easy, good answer for. And you heard Rob address the issue about the guy, becoming a slave, for the rest of his life by, trying to tweak the meaning of the word to something that no lexicon supports. But you notice, none of them have really talked about the trumpet issue, that verse. How does it work that's throughout your generations when it's one generation that was going to be in effect? I mean, that's weird. So there's a lot of, and just what does the word mean, and why are we, playing around with these, softball sort of arguments and not dealing with the real ones. I mean, for a long, long time, people like myself and Rob Solberg and Steve Gregg and folks have pointed this out. I'm not, my argument isn't even a big one. It's not even a deep one at all. I mean, we're going into a lot of time here, but it's really to address the things they're saying. It's not a deep argument. It's a simple one. It just says, look, see how this word doesn't always mean what you're saying it has to mean. Can you talk about that? But that's not what we're getting. I mean, on like I said, I listen to these guys more than just, every once in a while. But I on a more recent episode, they said something along the line. This came up again, but just sort of briefly. And they said, yeah, it just means forever, but that's not what it just means. I couldn't find that except as one of many possible meanings in the lexical sources. So maybe there's a lexical source that's super new and super exciting that I'm not aware of. But that's really where we're at. I don't know how to define it any other way than how they do. So let me jump down here and I want to focus a little bit on this. So this is something we heard already. Again, let me get back into the right spot.
I think where this argument is going to make the most sense is in the world to come. In other words...
Okay, I'm here. Sorry, I got to set this up better. Okay, so this is a clip, if I'm right, from Rob, and you heard it already, but in a bigger clip. So I want to now I want to focus on it a little bit. So let me play this for you real quick.
I think
It's
where
like the
this
Sabbath
argument is
command.
going to make
It's a
the
covenant,
most
covenant
sense
leolam between me and
is
Israel.
in the world to come. In other
Right.
words,
All right. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me fix something here. I know what's going wrong. I know what's happening.
It's like the Sabbath
where
command
this
is-
argument
Got
is going to
multiple videos that you can see. Okay. All right. Here we go. I'm a professional, folks. I'm a professional. Okay, here we go. This is Rob.
couple of things.
It's like the Sabbath command is a covenant leolam between me and Israel.
Right.
But they'll say, "Oh, it doesn't mean leolam. It doesn't mean forever. There, it only means for a dispensation." That's a
Okay, let's talk
that's
about
a
that though.
clever
Because
tool. That's a clever interpretive tool for a someone who's weaseling out of.
I
the
agree.
scripture.
I agree with you. But let's talk.
Okay. So let's talk about that. So he's saying it's a clever tool to weasel out of saying that the law is still in effect. Now the thing is, what have we seen? I'm showing you the actual sources. I'm showing you the actual texts that cannot, in context, mean forever and eternal. Those contexts are about commandments. They're found in the Torah. So I'm not jumping around to something else, like Caleb said people do, as far as going to, poetry and things like that. I'm not coming up with definitions that no one knows where they came from. I'm not weaseling out of everything, out of anything. So, that what we're looking at is just the source. We're looking at the word. Like I said, this is not a deep argument, but I want to at least point out, and I've acknowledged this many times already, but the fact is that the term does, and there are contexts where it does mean forever, like really forever, really eternal. A good example is in Psalm 90 verse 2, it says, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. From everlasting to everlasting. That's the Hebrew is Olam ad Olam. It's, wow, that's cool. You'll notice that's poetry too, by the way. So where it does mean forever for sure, it is in a poetic spot. So it's kind of the opposite of what Caleb was alleging earlier. But yeah, I mean, definitely when it's about certain things, that makes sense. It's definitely eternal. So it's a word that can do that in certain contexts. But that's not what we're really looking at. Another, let's see. So another thing I would point out to you is that in the Torah, when it's talking about commands, it's not hard to do to go look up the word and see how it's used. We find something very odd. I've pointed this out with regards to another phrase that's connected to this one, which is the one that's like throughout your generations. I pointed this out in another video that whenever that phrase is used, or some equivalent to it, throughout perpetual, throughout your generations, something like that, it's always, number one, that phrase is always about commands. That's not a turn of phrase that you find in poetic literature or anywhere else, that whole phrase. But the other thing is, whenever that's used, it's always about commands, and it's always about commands that I would disagree with Torah observers on. It's never about the ones that everyone agrees are actually eternal commands. You don't hear murder and adultery and idolatry and those condemnations. You don't hear this is a perpetual statute throughout your generations about those. And that should be, and remember, the root meaning is a long lasting, this is a long lasting statute throughout your generation. That's the more literal meaning of the word. It's odd that God doesn't ever use that language about the commandments that everyone believes really do last forever. So does it really mean forever? is the argument? Is the question I'm asking? But let's make even a slightly less ambitious claim, and just point this out. Olam, while it may mean eternal, le'olam, while it may mean forever, in some contexts, if it's about God's attributes and things like that, whenever we're looking at commandments, we see two things. We see two ways that it's expressed. It's either definitely not forever, and we've seen some of those examples, or it's definitely, or it's not definitely forever. In other words, there are no contexts when it's about a command where it has to mean forever, the way it does when it's about God and his attributes. So I'll say that again just to try to make sure we're all hearing this correctly. So when we're talking about commands and we're talking about this term either means it lasts a long time but definitely does not last forever, and we've looked at those texts, or it lasts a long time and it's just silent about how long that time is. We have no examples when it's about commands in the Torah where definitely has to mean forever and ever, and there's no way to get out of that from the context. Now, I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I've looked through them, and I have not found one that does that. The way that olam ad olam, everlasting to everlasting, you are God. The way that kind of language about God is used, I don't ever see that kind of strong language that clearly within the context, because there's other ways other than this one word that God could express that this will not change. He could come back later and say, those commands about the Torah are, no future covenant will ever have any effect on them or something. There's ways of expressing that, the Torah observance position but they're just all absent. There's no examples that make it absolutely have to be the case. So, okay. So let me check here if I have any more clips and make sure I haven't missed anything. Let me go ahead and check in here with y'all in the chat too. Let's see. Okay. Just seeing if there's anything that's relevant to me. Alrighty. Okay, doesn't look like there's no questions or anything popping up. So, all right. So I think I've got just a little bit more from their show. Oh, or at least some more I wanted to discuss. Oh, I see I have notes to talk about this throughout your generations stuff in more detail. So let's do that. That could be fun. All right, let's go grab it. So we're going to go back to the Bible Hub here and show you. I'm going to go back to Exodus 31 because it's got all our words we like in it. Let's see. Okay, so here is the term we're going to be talking about. So you'll see it says throughout your generations. It's actually just a really long word here. In this particular verse, it's ledoratechem. And I know my pronunciation is going to be terrible. But you notice when I click on the word, it just gives us door. So it's a very short term. It means period, generation, or dwelling, as far as the the lexical meaning. But the reason for that, and I'm gonna drop down here to some of the different forms, because we saw that we had a really long form there, right? That was like 5 or something. And you see down here, this is something Bible Hub does for you. So it gives you the different forms of the word. So door means, a generation. La or la is typically a preposition. So it could mean like for or to or something like to your generations. That's why, throughout your generations is this really long one. Ledora techem. So it's throughout, and that's probably where the le is coming, or maybe the le is your. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but here we have some different forms. So I want to point out some of these different ones and what they're used for and how they appear in the text and why, what's going on here. So the first one I'm going to look at is this ledoratem. This one, ledoratam. This has 11 occurrences. You can see here, this is Genesis 17, the circumcision command. This is something for after you throughout your generations. More about that throughout your generations. Exodus 12. Now, I'm not going to click on all those, but I'm just going to point out basically what we've got. So these 11 times this form appears, where it means throughout your generations. 2 of them have to do with the covenant of circumcision. We saw those. One is a Passover command. One is a Sabbath as the covenant sign. That's what we saw in Exodus 31. One has to do with tassels, and 6 of them have to do with laws concerning priesthood, temple, or sacrifices. So that's how that form, ledoratem, happens. The next one I have here is ledoratau, and that's just, it's translated, it's only like one time right here, and that's throughout his generation. So it belongs to his purchaser throughout his generations. It does not revert in the Jubilee. So that's what this is referring to, a certain kind of property, and that's that time. And then Ledoratakim, that's one of the ones we saw there. It appears 27 times, and here we see it right here, 27 occurrences. So those mean, just to run through them, the covenant of circumcision is one of those. Again, this is another time other than the other form. The weekly Sabbath, the sojourner who stays with Israel, refers to laws about him. Sons of Aaron signal the camp. This is the moving. This is what we already talked about. 6 of them refer to holy day commands not specific to the temple, meaning observing a certain holy day, treating this day as a Sabbath, things like that. So this is laws about particular holy days. And then 17 of them are laws about the priesthood and the temple and the sacrifices. So again, this is just kind of going into the detail of what I said earlier. This phrase is often used. I've heard Caleb use it many times to say this is a phrase we know it's perpetual. That's what it means. But that's not what it means. It means, basically to your generations, to you and the people, the generations that I'm talking to. And I would say, I point out the root term here, dor. That's the Hebrew root we're working on. That word means generation. And that a generation is not just a unit of time. A generation is also a people. My generations and your generations are not the same generations, unless you're my wife. And then at least our future generations are the same, but our past ones aren't. So the point is that it's I could just as easily say it's pointing to exclusivity. And the fact that it's only used of these types of laws, and again, not any of the ones that we would say are definitely universal for all the nations, not just Israel, and for all time, not just under a certain covenant, that everyone would agree on, those ones don't ever get this treatment. They're never throughout your generations. Those other laws. We just talked about all of them. I just went through them. So it's more of a, something that's attaching it to certain people than it is attaching it to, perpetuity or anything like that. So let's see. I'm gonna. Okay, so just go into some conclusions here, and then take any other questions anyone might have. So basically, I want to, it's in a nutshell, Olam doesn't mean forever. It can mean forever. But if you're going to use that argument to prove that Torah observance, that theology is true, you have to establish that in those texts it must mean forever. Because the fact that it has a range of meaning doesn't help you there. You need to actually establish it. And that's the thing that I found disappointing listening to the various. I've only encountered, in all the years that I've been studying and listening to different, teachers from these, these Torah movements, I've only ever heard 2 times anybody try to actually address the issues with the Hebrew here. One time I have a video on it from a ways back, was dealing with Zach Bauer. He said something about it, and he cited the Olam ad Olam, and that it, from everlasting to everlasting. See, it definitely means forever. So I went and checked it out, and of course, yeah, in that context, it does, and that's a poetic context, not a straight up teaching about law, and that phrase never gets used about any commandments in the Torah at all. So that just doesn't help. And that's basically all he had to say about it. He didn't go into much detail at all. And then the second time was this show that I played some clips from. The fact is that the best, really the only answers they had were to say that we like to focus on poetic texts, which, again, the people that, I feel bad for the person who wrote that email. I don't know. He said it was 6 pages. I don't know what was on all those 6 pages, but they didn't. If there were actual arguments or actual texts, it didn't come up in the show. Okay, here's one of the texts they said. Rather they, and maybe there weren't any. Maybe it was just kind of a long rambly email. I don't know. But I do know that I've encountered several folks like myself who are responding to Torah observance theology, who did just what I did and said, look, here's the meaning of the word, here's some of the ways it's used in context, and it doesn't have to mean, forever and ever. This is one of those cases where I actually really like the NIV translation. It's not as popular as it used to be, but the NIV pretty much throughout, when it's in the Torah, it uses the term lasting or long lasting, or for a long period or something. It uses this language that's indefinite, like the word olam is indefinite. So, but like there's lots of this stuff. But what we got from these guys was, hey, it means fixed, and all we have is Rob's word to go on that. I do hope that I know Caleb was here for the early part of the show. I do hope he listens to the rest of it and at least gets what he needs, and that they do, if there's a real honest to goodness lexicon out there that says Olam means something that's not related to time, I would love to see that. The fact is I don't. The fact is what I have seen is many, 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 many times folks in this movement will cite these texts in translations that use the word forever and just rest on that and just say, well, there it is. You see? And they never get into the details, and they never answer the tough questions. It's just the easy questions. And that's sad. I think that if you really think that you are a competent apologist for your position, handle the tough stuff. Don't limit yourself to the easily dismissed type of arguments. And it comes along with what Caleb said there in that first clip you talked about. This is a way they try to argue that the Torah has been done away with. And the fact is, yes, there are definitely pastors and teachers and people out there who use that language. I don't know of anybody who is well versed and understands your position as someone who's Torah observant who uses that language. I've never used that language. Never. You can go through every video. You'll never hear me say the Torah is done away with. I've also heard R.L. Solberg many times make it plain and stress the point. No, I do not believe the Torah has been done away with. What do we believe? We believe that we are under a new covenant and we have specifics to go along with that. We're not just saying, oh, see, it says new covenant. I've done lots of content on that. But because we're under a new covenant, some things have changed. And the way that we are meant to understand a lot of the texts from the Torah are not the same as how an Israelite prior to Christ was meant to understand those texts. Things have changed, and there's texts that say that. Hebrews says that where there's a change in the priesthood, there's a change in the law also. So there are texts that say there's a change in the law. And so we're digging into that and seeing how that looks. We're not saying the Torah is done away with. So but that's an easier target, isn't it? It's easier to attack the position that the Torah is done away with. It's easier to attack someone like Andy Stanley, who really talks that way, who really says we should just stop listening to the Old Testament. Now starts saying we should stop listening to the New Testament too. It's like, yeah, that's an easy target for, someone who believes the Bible is true. It's a lot harder target to go after a position that says, hey, we should really understand the proper interplay between Old and New Testament, we should properly understand what exactly was the Torah, what exactly are these laws, and how do they relate to God and his nature, to our nature, to specific covenants, how do the covenants relate to each other? These are all really important questions, and they all affect how we approach commandments found in the Torah. And so and that's something that I have striven to do from day one when I started addressing these issues, is to get to the heart of it, deal with the best that the other side has to offer, and not just what's really easy to address. So I hope they'll do that. I really do. But that's kind of where I'm at on that. All right, so let me check and see how things are going in the chat. Doesn't look like too much new things, so I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Just want to give you a couple of quick announcements. If you're watching this live, then you know that right now we're kind of right in the midst of a series on the dietary laws coming out. I've got another video coming on that out on that tomorrow, which directly addresses what, even though we weren't talking about dietary laws today, it addresses something Caleb said there when he's talking about the millennium and the future, the future reinstatement of laws and all of that, and how that relates to the dietary laws. So there's a favorite text in there that's addressed in my video. It's the first text when I went on Caleb's channel, his personal channel, and he interviewed me. It was the first text he brought up to challenge my position, to say, what do you think of this text? So it's definitely front of mind for a lot of people. It's one of the most popular things. It's Isaiah 66. It's one of the most popular comments I get on my videos. So I appreciate you guys. It's been great. Definitely, if you have questions, feel free to hit me up here on Facebook, wherever. I'll be glad to field questions, or maybe let you or point you to a video if I've already done something to answer your question. But it's good to see you guys, and I look forward to the next time. Look forward to doing this hopefully more often. Life's been crazy, but I'm looking to get back into the swing of these live streams. So anyway, it's been awesome, and I hope that you all have a wonderful, wonderful evening. God bless you.